My baby's not breathing.
Okay, and how old's your baby?
7 months old. Not getting any heartbeat or anything.
Okay, do you know why this is?
I've had 3 steps already.
Pardon?
I've had 3 go already.
And your name?
It's Kathy.
I remember meeting Kath when we were in the same class in primary school. She just was really open and kind, and we were inseparable.
Kath created a web of deceit.
My name's Tracy Chapman. I'm a lifelong friend of
Kathleen Clark.
To cover her unimaginable crimes.
She'd been vilified by the media.
Sentenced to 40
Jailed
years.
for 40 years.
She was moved up here to Clarence. The living conditions were tough. Hard floors, cold surfaces, cameras on you, being called to muster every morning, having to stand there to attention with your hands in front of you. There's noise over the loudspeakers all the time. And there's lights 24 hours a day. Down in the recreational area, Kath was attacked. She just caught up into a ball on the floor and they laid into her, attacking her, kicking her, punching her. I guess that's what happens when, you know, everyone believes that you've murdered your babies.
An expert has claimed that some babies who are diagnosed as cot death victims have really been killed by their parents.
Kathy, did you kill Caleb?
No!
Angela Canning fought back tears as she denied.
The only evidence was Meadows' law. 3 dead babies is murder.
He became convinced of his own supremacy.
The chances of cot death striking a family twice were 1 in 73 million.
The Cheshire solicitor who murdered her 2 baby sons has tonight begun a life sentence.
He has ruined my life. There was a witch hunt going on.
How could science have been ignored?
I now suffer the minute-by-minute torture of life imprisonment.
Is there a more hated woman in Australia?
She has been labelled the worst serial killer we've ever had.
Maybe she was wrongly accused.
Do you know what sort of person would kill 4 children?
I have no comprehension.
Kathy, did you kill Caleb?
No!
Did you kill Patrick?
No.
Kathy, did you kill Sarah?
No.
And did you kill Laura?
No.
In Annandale in 1969, there were a couple. Thomas John Britton, who'd emigrated from England. He was hard-drinking, womanising, not a very nice man. And he had a partner called Kathleen Donovan, who was also a very big drinker. They had a big fight, and she stormed off, taking his wages with her in her bag. She was staying with friends in Pritchard Street. He waited for her to come home. He had a carving knife, and as she drove up in a taxi, he crossed the road and he stabbed her. She fell to the ground. He stabbed her again 28 times. The neighbours came out, people were looking. Call the police, he said. The great tragedy is the couple had a baby, and her name was Kathy.
Newcastle is a great place to grow up. There was a group of girls. We all lived close to the beach, so we spent time at the beach. Kath and I, we just got on really well straight away.
My name's Megan. I've known Kath since about 1980 when we started at Katara High together. This is Katara High at the front entrance. Hasn't changed at all. This is a photo of Kath and I, taken when we were in Year 10, so 1983. I had a blazer and I thought I was pretty special. Instead of a daggy green jumper. That's taken just down there, just in front of the canteen.
Kath and I, we weren't the in crowd at school, so we kind of hung around at school with a whole bunch of boys that played chess during school lunchtimes and all that sort of stuff.
This is the house that Kath grew up in. I can't remember where her bedroom was, but she lived there the whole time.
We knew her parents were very strict, but my parents were strict as well, so we had that in common. But we didn't know at the time that she was a foster child.
On her first day, she walked into our music class and told me that Deirdre, Kath's foster mother, hadn't ever adopted her. She was still a ward of the state, and they told her that her father had murdered her mother, which is a real nice birthday present to give a 16-year-old.
Her parents weren't her parents. We sort of all went, oh, wow.
She turned 18, finished school, moved out of Deirdre's house and started working.
We used to go to parties on weekends, and she went out dancing one night, and that's when she met Craig. She wanted to marry him and everything. It was all a bit of a shock because he was older than her as well, and we didn't know this man at all.
Craig's a car salesman. He's very charismatic in the way he can tell a story, and he enjoyed having an audience. He had a T-shirt that said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." That's Craig.
They married, moved to a suburb called Mayfield.
They seemed very happy and they wanted a family.
Caleb was born in February 1989.
It was noted at the hospital that he had difficulties breathing and swallowing simultaneously, and the doctors diagnosed him with a floppy larynx, what we call laryngomalacia.
On the 19th of February, Kathy gave him a feed at 1 a.m. and at 2:53 a.m. found his body.
He was 19 days old.
When you lose a child, it's the worst thing in the world. I just felt that I was failing at the plan of life which I thought I was supposed to be undertaking.
The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. SIDS is an unexpected death of infants, typically while asleep, by causes that cannot be explained.
Patrick was born a year later.
A battery of tests are done on him and nothing's wrong.
Kath and Craig were so happy.
4 months later, Kathy goes in to find him and he's not breathing.
But they got the ambulance to him in time to be revived. But the result of that was epilepsy and the fact that he was blind.
4 months after that, after a series of hospital visits and more seizures, Patrick is found dead by Kathy.
Kath was devastated. She was just left to fend for herself and dig her way out of her own depression.
My depressions were when they hit quite deep. I felt alone and that I'd failed.
Patrick died because of airway obstruction due to an epileptic fit.
It wasn't sudden infant death syndrome.
After Patrick died, Kath and Craig moved to Thornton, and there she became pregnant with Sarah, and I was pregnant with Alex.
Don't leave me alone. I'm not going to leave you. Yeah, I'll just stay.
Kath and I just hung out together with the babies. Eat lunch together, watch a movie, interact with the babies on a blanket on the floor. Sarah was a happy little baby. And Kath was very vigilant.
They don't want this child to die. In August the following year, middle of the night, Kathy alone goes in the room, heart-rending scream. She finds Sarah.
Craig rang. Sarah was dead.
Just as I was starting to think of a future, Sarah was taken away. I had a belief that my children had decided they weren't staying with me anymore. And I did not understand why. I blamed myself.
She wouldn't wash handprints off the windows. It was very scary. It was devastating. I didn't cope very well. I couldn't go to the funeral. I was too upset.
The autopsy lists the cause of death as sudden infant death syndrome. Sarah is the third child in the family to die in 4.5 years.
In 1993, the same year that Kathy Folbeck's third child dies, a trial begins in Britain of Beverly Allen. The newspapers call her the Angel of Death.
Alec works on the children's ward in Grantham. She murdered 4 children by injecting them with insulin. She was a manipulative, devious, wicked woman, seeking only to big herself up.
Beverly Gale Allett was remanded in custody for her own protection.
One of the best witnesses for the prosecution was Professor Roy Meadow, and he's an expert on child abuse.
Professor Meadow was a very eminent professor. He had a very impressive background of research. He was a force to be reckoned with.
He made his name defining Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It was the harming of other people, often small children, to get attention to yourself.
An adult, nearly always the mother, invents or causes her child to be ill. Sometimes poisons her child or suffocates her child, and then takes that ill child to the doctor without saying that she has caused the illness.
Guilty of murdering 4 children.
The verdict confirmed Beverly Allitt as Britain's worst female serial killer this century.
The Beverly Allitt trial made Roy Meadow a rock star.
Suddenly he was Mr. Popular, and he was asked to give evidence in similar trials.
But actually, his specialty was cot death.
An expert has claimed that some babies who are diagnosed as cot death victims have really been killed by their parents.
I think Roy Meadow genuinely believed that any case of sudden infant death was actually a murder. He called it a covert way of murdering children.
Meadow had carried out his own research project into 81 infant deaths, which had apparently been caused by sudden infant death syndrome, but he insisted were actually murder.
So he turns into a conviction machine.
He was very suspicious of mothers who lost 2 or 3 children, and he felt that it was his mission to bring these women to justice.
People who have committed crimes of one sort or another go on protesting their innocence, don't they?
I've been a journalist for a long time, but the story of Sally Clark, I think about most days. Sally met the man of her dreams and got married to him, Stephen was his name, in 1990. They came from similar backgrounds, both were very ambitious, they wanted to become lawyers, and they settled down in Wilmslow, which is about an hour outside Manchester. And it's full of affluent people. So they were doing very well in their careers. And they wanted a family. Their first baby, Christopher, was born in the autumn of 1996. Sally was absolutely thrilled, and she told me, adored him from the moment she saw him. But when he was only 11 weeks old, something went very wrong.
I got a call from Macclesfield Hospital and I drove there in a bit of a daze. I don't remember much about it. And when I got there, Sally was in floods of tears and inconsolable because she'd found Christopher in his Moses basket earlier on that evening.
Christopher was buried 3 days before Christmas. The post-mortem found the cause of death to be a lower respiratory tract infection, a natural cause. She thought that the best way to get over Christopher's terrible death was to have another baby, and luckily, a year later, little Harry was born.
8 weeks later, it's January 1998. Sally goes shopping, baby Harry's in the pram. There's a flower shop called Chelsea Flowers, she loves that. She goes to the butcher's, picks up some chops. Everything's fine, she comes back.
Steve gets home around 8 o'clock that night. They go to bed early, they're watching television, and then Steve goes downstairs to make a bottle for the midnight feed.
I'd been downstairs 2 or 3 minutes when Sally screamed for me. I rushed upstairs as quickly as I could, and she'd found Harry in his bouncy chair, apparently not breathing.
Sally calls for an ambulance, but when they came, they found it was too late. He'd already gone.
She was hysterical, overcome with grief. It happened to her twice. It happened to us both twice. I was just numb again.
A few days later, it's dawn in leafy Wilmslow.
2 police cars arrive. 5 police officers get out. And the police officer says that there is evidence that Harry was unlawfully killed.
Steve and Sally were taken to the local police station and put in separate cells.
And Sally is interrogated by an officer who proceeds to suggest to her that she has shaken Harry to death.
Do you go to Harry then?
I go to Harry, yeah.
Right.
I shout, screech out to Steve. I was in a panic. I never never shook him. It was just so precious. I know
It's very painful to listen to. She feels it's totally unreal. How could you accuse me of killing my babies when I have loved them so very much? But it gets even worse. The pathologist, Alan Williams, decides to go back to Christopher's post-mortem, and he changes his mind. He decides that his death wasn't by natural causes, but that he was smothered.
You both just doted on him.
You can feel the immense sorrow.
I just can't believe this is happening to me.
She realises that they don't believe her.
It's been the worst 4 weeks of my life.
After an inquiry that lasted a full 18 months, she was charged with the murder of Christopher and the murder of baby Harry.
At the same time as Sally Clark was being investigated, there was another It felt I was living inside a witch hunt.
Since Sarah dying, Kath and Craig needed a new start, and they moved to Singleton, about an hour out of Newcastle. The house was always spotless. Photos of all the babies everywhere. And then they told us that they were going to try for another baby. I remember driving home that night, just like, I don't know if I can go through this again. Laura was born at the beginning of August 1997.
Oh, bless you.
My preparation with Laura was almost extreme. Changing the home and the environment, trying to keep my relationship and my marriage as perfect as I thought it was supposed to be, and I had in my head decided that I had to have learnt lessons from my last three, so therefore Laura would be fine.
Kath wouldn't let just anyone babysit. You had to have done a CPR course.
My name's Karen Hall. I took a CPR course in case something went wrong when I babysat Laura. Everything was in place to make sure it didn't happen again.
Where are you?
They had a totally different monitor with Laura, and it was all hooked into the phone line, and the information was uploaded each morning to the hospital.
Laura was at my house. She's about 12 months old. She laid up on my couch and had a sleep. So I went back to the kitchen, flicked the kettle on, went back into the lounge room, and Laura was on the lounge. But she was a funny colour. She wasn't normal. And it frightened the crap out of me. So, and adrenaline just took over. I couldn't tell whether she was breathing. I put my hand on her chest. I put it in front of her face. I couldn't feel anything. So I scooped her up, put her on the floor to do CPR. And with the movement, I must have just jolted her enough. And she took 2 or 3 really big deep breaths. And I waited, and she started to breathe. And then I just picked her up and hugged her and waited for Mum to come back. And then the 8 months later.
Emergency. I know, I need an ambulance. My baby's not breathing. Okay, and how old's your baby? 7 months old. Can you just hold a minute? I'm trying to do CPR. 20 months old. Not getting any heartbeat or anything. Okay, do you know why this is? I've had 3 deaths already. Pardon? I've had 3 go already. And your name? It's Kathy.
My sister rang. And I said, what's the problem? She said, it's Laura. She's at the hospital. And we drove to the hospital where I could see Kath and Laura on the bed. Kath was crying, so I knew that it wasn't good.
I had almost convinced myself that my children had decided to not stay with me. I felt depressed. I always thought it was me. And I constantly blamed myself for everything. It was quite a warped view.
After the funeral, we were back at her house. She took me into Laura's bedroom and she said, I need to get away from the people so that I can cry. So we had a good cry in there together. But she couldn't cry in front of a whole group of people.
Laura's death was different. The doctor takes aside the local detective and says, this is the 4th child. There might be something suspicious about it. The autopsy was undetermined. The pathologist did find myocarditis, a heart disease, but he said that wasn't significant enough to actually cause her death. The police went back to the house and took photographs, the baby monitor, the shoes, a strange blood stain on a pillow.
I was there when the police was there. I just thought it was normal. I think I watched too many TV shows.
And they filed this crime scene report. And it shows clearly the police were preserving the scene.
That's what I remember the inside of the house looking like. That's Laura's room. She had so many stuffed toys. That's the kitchen bench where she attempted to resuscitate Laura.
In the kitchen on the breakfast bar, there was a quantity of ambulance paraphernalia. On the floor below the breakfast bar was a yellow-coloured T-shirt that Laura was wearing when she died.
It's Laura's shirt, and it's been cut off by the ambos to do the CPR.
There was no firm evidence. There were no definite causes of death that would point to foul play. But the police clearly had their suspicions.
Then Craig said to me, "Stuff's going down." Weird. It was weird, the way he dealt with what was happening.
Police had a sense that something was amiss. There were 4 children dead. Was there more to this?
Angela Cannings was the only adult in the house when the 3 babies died. Police said murdered by their mother.
The officer got me to sit down in the living room, and he actually held my hand, and he then said, "I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Gemma, Jason and Matthew." I just screamed.
A Salisbury woman accused of murdering her baby.
Her 7-week-old son and later his 4-month-old brother.
Her son Jason, who was only weeks old.
I'm Jackie Cameron. I was legal assistant to the solicitor for Angela Cannings, and I got a call to the office to say that she needed help.
Angela Canning is accused of murdering her babies.
Gemma was born in 1989, and she died when she was 13 weeks old. And she was what they considered to be a cot death. Jason was born in April 1991, and he was only 7 weeks old when he died. And now we had a third one, Matthew.
Police said there were too many coincidences for Angela Cannings to be innocent.
I was used to dealing with all sorts of crimes, but this was big. Killing children is not something that happens in Salisbury. Angela had to come to the office for us to take a detailed statement. I was apprehensive. A woman who was accused of killing children scared me. They came into the office. Angela was very zombie-like, not talking, very pale, looking at the floor. I felt, in the first instance, scared, then angry that somebody had done this to children. But when she started to talk, it broke my heart. She was just not understanding it. It was looking at her in the emotional state that she was in that really got to me. And I was in her company within 10 minutes when I knew that she hadn't killed anyone.
Angela Cannings had lost 3 children. All the evidence pointed in one direction. Days later, Angela Cannings is arrested for the murder of her 3 babies.
It became clear that Professor Sir Roy Meadow was going to be the prosecution's main witness.
By now, he'd been knighted for his services to child health. And since the Beverly Alex trial, he'd been called as a witness to innumerable cases.
Where cot death is concerned, He followed Meadows' law.
Roy Meadow had a theory with regard to infants that died suddenly at home with no known cause.
Meadows' law, identifying that one child death
is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious,
3 murder,
and 3 is murder.
In Angela's case, the only evidence was Meadows' law. 3 dead babies is murder. And of course Angela fitted that picture.
We know parents kill their children. We know mothers smother their babies. That's a fact. They've confessed to it, and over the last 20 years, I've actually had 2 confessions to me.
Sally Clark herself, a former solicitor, and her husband Stephen insist the children were victims of crop death.
Did you consider the possibility that Sally might have harmed your children?
I'd be lying to you if I told you it hadn't flicked through my mind for one very brief moment. But it was dismissed immediately. She didn't hurt our children, she loved them.
I read articles for the Daily Mail, the Mail on Sunday, the Observer. And when I was at the BBC, I started digging into the facts of the Sally Clark case. On the 11th of October 1999, Sally Clark's murder trial began.
I think the police had it in for Sally and Steve. I think they thought they got this big house, they've got this comfortable lifestyle, they don't care about children. They drew a narrative which said, oh, well, Sally didn't want to have a glamorous life interrupted by little babies.
Sally, according to the prosecution, was a selfish, career-obsessed depressive who viewed her babies as a hindrance.
The pathologist, Dr. Alan Williams, gives evidence that Sally had smothered baby Christopher, and with baby Harry she'd violently shaken the baby to death.
Williams demonstrated to the jury while in the witness box how you shake a child, and he shook his arm like that. Well, it had a terrific impact on the jury, and it had a drastic impact on Sally.
The vast majority of paediatricians involved were men. They had not brought up babies and children themselves. They weren't looking for anything that might have killed the child. They were looking to prove that the child had been murdered.
Home Office pathologist Dr. Alan Williams concluded that Harry had been shaken on several occasions.
I'm Phil Lissett. I'm a professor of pathology at UCL in London. I was an expert witness in the trial of Sally Clark. The prosecution pathologist said that with shaken baby syndrome, there's bleeding at the back of the eye. But as a defence expert, my interpretation was, yes, there was some blood there, but it hadn't been there prior to Harry's death. It wasn't shaken baby syndrome.
It was a battle of the experts, with the jury deciding who was the winner.
Today, testimony of one of the country's leading experts on cot death, Sir Roy Meadow.
Professor Meadow walked in as if he was a star of the show. The prosecution team are obviously delighted.
Meadows had devoted a large part of his life to protecting children.
I think he felt that he was a hero.
And he was convinced he was never wrong.
His belief that a baby cannot be well 1 minute and dead the next.
There is an absence of evidence saying Sally Clark murdered her kids. There's no evidence from a witness of ever her harming the babies. There's a lot of love in the family. None of that cuts through. What does cut through is Professor Roy Meadow telling the jury the chances of a middle-class, non-smoking mum like Sally having 2 cot deaths were 73 million to 1 against.
The original trial, Professor Meadow...
73 million. 73 million.
According to Sir Roy Meadow, there was a 1 in 73 million chance of a family like the Clarks suffering two
Well, 1 in 73 million.
He said it was an event so rare, it was likely to happen just once every 100 years.
1 in 73 million was Sally's downfall.
When the jury came back to give their verdicts, one of the jurors was crying. She held her head in her hands, but the verdict was clear and it was guilty.
The solicitor was found guilty of murdering her two sons when they were babies, was given 2 life sentences today.
She was convicted by a majority verdict of 10-2. Steve mouths, "I love you," across the courtroom. The judge has no alternative other than to sentence her to life imprisonment. And Sally, white as a sheet, trembling, is led down beneath the Crown Court in Chester.
The Cheshire solicitor murdered her...
Jury was told 1 in 73
Clark from Wilmslow killed her children.
Sally Clark heads for prison as the mother who murdered her infant sons.
Then the newspapers went for Sally Clark. The Sun wrote about a house of horror, and she'd taken the life of her vulnerable and defenseless sons.
I'd started to write about the case. I was writing features for the Daily Mail, and I'd gone to see the family, and I was not greeted with exactly a great deal of warmth, because the Mail, in the wake of the conviction, had been briefed by the boys in blue, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, that she was actually a bit of a drinker and she didn't want her glamorous lifestyle upset by baby boys.
There is something elemental, frightening, powerful about people's hatred of women who they think have murdered children.
When those babies died, somebody had to be punished. So they went hunting, and it became mass hysteria, where every child that died supposedly was potentially a murder victim.
The Cheshire solicitor who murdered her 2 baby sons has tonight begun a life sentence.
In the hierarchy of the prison system, the child killer is the lowest of the low. And the mother who kills her own baby is even lower than that. When Sally arrived at Style Prison, she said that she saw 50 faces. No one said a word, they were silent. But she felt they were all screaming at her, "Murderer, die, woman, die."
Craig and Kathy were going through a very difficult time. 4 children dead. And the relationship was fraying. Then Craig says that he discovers in Kathy's bedside cabinet her diary. Craig read the diaries and Kathy wrote, "I know there's nothing wrong with them. Nothing out of the ordinary anyway, because it was me, not them." And then he read the words, "I am my father's daughter."
Craig handed in the diaries to the police. But Craig never found those journals, because found implies hidden, and they weren't hidden. They always lived on the bedside table.
Detectives invited Kathy down to the police station, just to talk.
Kathy, you're not the sort of person who would kill 4 children?
I have no comprehension.
They start questioning her about the journals.
With Sarah, all I wanted was for her to shut up, and one day she did.
Are you responsible for the death of Sarah?
No.
She was in an incredible amount of shock.
Did you kill Sarah?
No.
She kept saying they've misinterpreted the diaries.
They played a part in the frustration and the stress, maybe.
I knew I was short-tempered and cruel with her, and she left with a little bit of help.
The feelings that you always have that both of you could have done more.
She wasn't getting proper grief counselling.
So some others do.
She was depressed and not being helped.
Stress made me do terrible things.
Kath just kept going, this is wrong.
Kathy, did you kill Caleb?
No!
Did you kill Patrick?
No!
Did you try to kill Patrick on that near-miss episode?
No!
Did you kill Sarah?
No.
And did you kill Laura?
No.
The police said she had smothered her 4 children and then recorded the fact in her diaries.
Arrested earlier today, Kathleen Folbig has been charged with murdering all 4 of her children.
The experts put forward as a theory, Meadows' law. You can't have 4 natural deaths of children in a family. That must be homicide.
Police say the chance of all 4 was 1 in a trillion.
I'd read about Meadows' law in the newspapers, and it all just started to look almost like a setup to us. We couldn't believe it.
She was unable to form a normal relationship with her own children.
The narrative was quite unforgivable, really. She's lost her 4 children, and we're treating her in this fashion. And it's despicable.
This was a very dark time for women.
It's slowly destroying me.
Meadows' law is bouncing around the world.
He has ruined my life.
She has been labelled the worst serial killer that we've ever had.
I didn't kill my children.
People were getting crucified.
How could science have been ignored?
It's a witch hunt.
If you cried, you were guilty. No emotion, you were guilty.
It had to be stopped. We felt that we were the ones to do it.